Welcome to Conversations with Sarah. Today I'm joined by Hannah, CEO of Willow PR VA Services, to have a conversation about her experience of supporting a loved one through mental health struggles. Welcome, Hannah.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming to share your story today.
Thank you for having me.
And you was explaining to me what VA Services is before we started. I didn't know if you wanted to kind of let people listening know what that is.
Okay, sure. So VA, basically a virtual assistant. So I do things in the background for people on a virtual basis. So my passion is to save people time so they can embrace on their passions, their business, and find their life-work balance. So I basically pick up the stuff that they really procrastinate about and just can't get their head around. And It could be something really tiny or something really massive. So yeah, that's Perfect. What I do.
Thank you. And okay. You're coming today to talk more about sort of your personal experience of living with someone with mental health struggles and how you've sort of worked together. So whenever you're ready, where would you like to start with that story?
Okay, so it's my husband. He suffers with his mental health. He's always lived with some sort of anxiety, but it probably started near on about 10 years ago when my daughter had a febrile convulsion when she was 3, and he ended up losing his job, but he should have taken him to court with constructive dismissal and he didn't. So it kind of like spiraled from that sort of area. And about 2 years after that, he was diagnosed with depression, and it was fine. He was put on medication, etc. But then it kind of gradually got worse and worse. He has a lot of self-limiting beliefs. He is very confident in his job and what he does, but it takes up a lot of his headspace, if you like. He's a manager, and he has to deal with other people's problems, and he was like a little sponge, and he was taking it all on board and sort of soaking it all in, all the kind of negative energy, and it hasn't really helped. In December 2019, he was very poorly. The doctor put it down to having a really bad case of the flu. Now we're in sort of 2021. I think probably it was COVID, but there was a lot of other viruses around at that time. But he's slowly, gone up and down all through the year. And he was signed off sick for about 6 weeks. So he had like 3 weeks off to recover from the flu. Then he was signed off again last summer, and he's having to work on himself, but he thinks he can do it by himself. And actually, it's really difficult for somebody to, when they are in the midst of depression, to kind of work out what they need for themselves. They do need to talk to somebody. And from my point of view, over the years, I've attended a lot of mental health groups, and I have taught myself how to speak differently. I think language, when you're speaking to someone that has depression or mental health issues, your language is paramount. So there are certain situations where you think, right, how can I rephrase this? Because it's not actually negative, but you could see that someone would see it as a negative thing. Like, I don't know, household bills gone up, or, something really, really trivial, but you have to really work out how to approach those kind of situations. Sometimes it'll be different situations for different people, but, it's learning how to deal with that without it spiraling out of control and having a massive family meltdown.
There is a thing that's like decision fatigue, and it becomes, we all have a tolerance for what we can deal with. So if in one role in our life we need to be fully on board, fully responsible, dealing with everything, it is very easy in other areas of our life that people would think, well, you can do all of that, and actually it's quite difficult to be at the top of your game on every area of your life. So I think that, like you say, there's something in recognizing that the way in which you bring up something that you need to deal with, the language around it can change the reaction that you get from a person.
Yeah. And it's taken me a very long time to work with that. I've had to work on myself before sort of having the confidence to have do recordings like this, because if I can help one other person that's supporting somebody with mental health issues, then that's I think that's an achievement. Everybody's going to work in different ways. There are different strains of mental health as well, so it wasn't really that big a deal when he was first diagnosed, other than the fact that we knew he needed a little bit of additional support. Whereas now he's really struggling. Like when the weather gets colder, it goes straight to his head, so he has like a really bad head cold. And this past year and a half, he's really suffered with that. But finally he went to the doctor, had a face-to-face appointment with the doctor, and they've now redirected him to ENT, so ear, nose and throat, to see whether there's anything actually going on. Finally had a blood test, and it turns out that his vitamin D levels are extremely low.
And as you're talking, since you've brought it up, as you're talking, one of the things that I'm thinking about is, has he had a vitamin panel? Because B12, this is something I go on loads about in my private group. B12 vitamin deficiency, one of the symptoms of that is like depression, anxiety, and it's quite often misdiagnosed as mental health issues. And it doesn't mean that there isn't some stuff going on, but if those vitamins were where they needed to be, the symptoms can be dramatically reduced. And I think that's something that really gets overlooked. And I was just trying to hold it in my head that to have a chat with you afterwards, but since you brought it up, I'm throwing it out there for everyone. Like, get your vitamin panels checked, and don't just take like what the doctor says, like you're in range. Quite often range and optimum are not the same thing. But I think this is going to be another podcast that I do. So he had his vitamin D come back.
His vitamin D, obviously that drives depression as well. It drives depression. It drives
bone pain.
Yeah, and the other thing, so his levels should be at 75 and they're at 28, so they're extremely low. My concern is that they haven't followed it up with anything. Like there's no so your vitamin D is really low and that's it. So they haven't followed it up with anything. Do you know what? It was a relief to find out that something was wrong. Because there's something to work with. If it had come back normal, you'd be like, right, okay, then there's another bit that we have to keep searching. Whereas we still need to search, but at least we've got something to work with. And it does, with the fact that his vitamin D levels are so low, it does kind of tick a lot of boxes, and it kind of puts a lot of things into perspective. And you think, do you know what? The more you read about the lack of vitamin D, the more it makes sense of how he's been feeling.
And I think it's so easy for people to dismiss that a vitamin can have such an impact on your mental health, because society, we are very programmed to think, well, if there's something in my mind that that's not working so well for me, then I must just take antidepressants and that's the end of it. Now, I'm not in any way saying antidepressants aren't useful, but if what's going on for you is something else, then the antidepressant isn't going to do the job. So
it's just going to cover it up.
And it really is. I think it's so important to recognize that looking after your mental health is multifaceted. Physical health does come into it, and I know there's a misconception that with some conditions it's all in your head. It's not. It's real. It's really real. What you're dealing with is really real. You're not imagining it. Your pain is real. The fatigue is real, and it can get dismissed as a mental health issue. So I think it's so important to kind of bring that awareness in when we're talking about mental health issues, that the physical issues that you can experience, they are very real and can also be a part of something else that is going on.
Yeah, 100%. And another passion of mine is, prevention over cure, and dealing with things on a natural basis. So when James was actually taken poorly in December 19, my daughter was also ill for a week, as was half of her school. And then my son was also ill over that Christmas as well. I didn't get it. And I basically swear by plant-derived minerals, and I don't know whether that's it could just be, just really a random thing that I just didn't get poorly over that period, or it could be because I look after myself from the inside out. So we have basically, he has fizzy vitamins which aren't synthetically made, and also we have made sure that we've included a lot more vitamin D enriched foods in our diet. So,
I mean, I know, like I've shared in pretty much every episode that I've got health conditions. I was practically bedridden and given a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. What I discovered is actually a lot of my vitamins are very, very low, and a lot of people with these types of conditions are. And I've had to learn a lot of this stuff for myself, because unfortunately, unless you find a GP who's really, really interested in this, it does kind of just get dismissed as go and take a vitamin, or like add these things to your diet. But for some people, their bodies don't absorb the vitamins correctly. There's gene mutations, there's digestive issues, there's medication that they take. It really is, I think, like you say, you need to be treating from the inside out, but it also needs to be a really holistic way of looking at what is going on for me. Because if one thing is out of balance, it can domino affect everything, can't it? And really, we do accept if a GP says this is wrong with you, take this tablet, we'll go okay, and we do it. And that it might deal with the symptom, but not necessarily the cause.
Yeah, and it was when he had a blood test before, it came back normal. So that was probably when he was first poorly about 1.5 years ago. So that has dramatically changed over the last year, which says to me even more that what he's going through at the moment is possibly the long COVID condition, which also affects your mental health and everything else. So
and there's studies that it's connected into like the vitamin deficiency. So whether it's a cause or a symptom, I think the last thing that I read was unknown. But people catching COVID, there's been a query around if they have low vitamin D to start with, which is why they've been more prone to catch it. And I think, like, it's not just COVID, any, like you say, any kind of cold, flu, if you're not as well as you need to be on a cellular level, of course you're more likely to catch and have more severe symptoms of. And we just don't know enough, do we, about the sort of the long COVID and how that's impacting people yet.
No, we don't. And I think sort of making notes and stuff about how James has been feeling, I've been doing some reading and stuff, and it's not, I don't want to get into a debate or anything about COVID, but I do think that still people are being a little bit dismissive about the whole long COVID thing and how it is actually affecting people on a long-term basis, rather than I know that it's a lot of people have suffered, but it's that long-term thing as well. Like
as someone with a long-term health condition, that the symptoms of are very similar to the symptoms of long COVID. It's not fun. It's not a fun place to be. And it is something that I think definitely they all need a lot more exploration around, because like you're saying, you see, or what I think you're saying is that you see the links between what's going on with his vitamin levels, with his the health in that way is having a knock-on effect to the severity of the symptoms of his mental health state.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I'd say he's the whole reason why I am able to, I feel comfortable talking about this is because he's started to talk to people himself. So I still feel like I'm feeling like dealing with it a little bit by myself, because I don't really want to highlight the negativity to his family. But it's really tough. It's really tough to be, you know, and this, my daughter's going through a little bit of a phase of overthinking things as well. And it is a trait from his granddad, through his mum, through him, and I really want to nip it in the bud for this next generation. So I think for me, being a supportive partner, wife and mother, it's you need to have that little bit of support yourself. So I speak to people on a regular basis. I tell people, and I never used to. I'm an only child, so I grew up with not having anyone to talk to. So I've always dealt with stuff by myself. But once I started feeling confident that I can go to a mental health group, that it's not me that's suffering, but I can learn how to help them. Because sometimes when you've got mental health, you don't want to go to those groups. You don't want to highlight the fact that you're struggling. Like James doesn't. Like he wouldn't even dream of going to a group. So he's very, very self-conscious, and he would never put himself forward like that. And he was having some talks with a charity, and then he stopped because he felt like it wasn't working, so it wasn't doing him any good. And I was like, but you needed to speak to them and tell them that you felt that way, so maybe they would start from another avenue. And you know, that's
a really key thing as well. When you feel low, when you feel depressed, when you feel anxious, when the world feels difficult, it's so much harder to say this isn't working for me, because it can be internalized as a you problem, as opposed to the service isn't working in the way that I need. And like, it's so important, I think, that people that are going through not feeling the best about the world at the moment, that if you are having counselling, if you're working with a therapy service, you are allowed to say, I'm not okay with how this is going. They are a service provider, you are a client. You have every right to ask for what you need, even if you don't know exactly what it is that you need. If what you're getting isn't working for you, whilst it might be really, really hard to communicate, try, because that is what they're there to do.
And you know, just because you know, if you're not feeling like you're getting anything out of it, don't just stop. Like, especially if you are also sort of going back to like medication, if you're starting to feel better, don't just stop. Good as well, from a partner's point of view, to actually say, you need to have some additional help, this is too big. And that's no disrespect to the person that's suffering, that's no disrespect to the environment that they're in. It's just that sometimes this part of your journey is just that little bit too big to cope with by ourselves, and we do need to have that additional support. I mentioned that my daughter's having issues at the minute, and I had to be quite frank with my husband yesterday and say, he's like, well, she's just not helping herself. I said, but neither are you. So you know, you have to see that you've got to lead by example with this kind of thing. And he's like, well, she wouldn't see me doing it anyway. I'm like, she really would. You know, it's that habitual habits that you get into. Like, you say, oh, I really should get on the exercise bike because I feel so much better afterwards, and then you go and sit on the sofa. I really must get out and get some fresh air, but then you go and tidy the kitchen. So you're telling yourself out loud that actually I need to be doing a little bit more to help myself, but I'm not doing it. So she's hearing that.
But then the inaction can then be used as, so the not doing something is then often used as a punishment, like, oh, I know I should do this, I don't do this, now I'm going to feel guilty and bad about that. And that's where I always say, like, be kind to yourself. Just like, if you recognize that you're doing this thing, that's when, don't give yourself hassle for it, don't have a go at yourself, because most likely you've been doing that for however long you've been feeling this way, it's not working. So perhaps just ask yourself, okay, what stopped me doing that today? How could I overcome this tomorrow? Like, just be kind to yourself about it, because giving yourself hassle isn't helping. And sometimes we don't do the things that are in our best interest, and being curious about why you're making that choice can help you make a conscious change, I think.
Yeah, and you not having a journal, and I know this, you know, a lot of people don't really understand journaling, and I think it gets a little bit overcomplicated, when actually journaling is just about writing your feelings down. You know, having some positive affirmations in the morning, and it does take a while to get your head around it, to be honest, but having positive affirmations, having a little book. I bought this little book actually, One Thought of the Day, I don't know, the book that I picked up. And actually you can just write down your thoughts of the night time, or three positive words from the day, or something that you've achieved that you're proud about. And it might be that not every day you've got something that you've achieved, and it might be that actually you're just grateful for the sunshine, or you might be grateful for the rain because it waters the grass and the plants. It's just about having
you woke up this morning and your body moved. That's a positive. It is really just finding any of those things. And I talk a lot in my private group about how we've got negative bias. So our brains are hardwired to notice more negative. It was a survival thing from back in, you know, when we were living in caves and whatever, and so it is really important to be consciously aware of noticing the positives, noticing the gratitude, and I know when you're in the thick of it all, when you're in the thick of not feeling great about the world, depression, anxiety, however you want to label it, it seems impossible to do. But just being thankful of being able to take a deep breath, or being able to wiggle your toe, being able to make a cup of tea, as much as they sound like ridiculous, it makes such a difference.
They're tough for some people though. You know, some people, you know, the whole self-care Sunday scenario, you know, a lot of people will share on their social media about self-care Sunday. And actually, for somebody that has a really busy life, taking a bath might actually be their half an hour of stuff. But you don't, you know, everybody's different, you know, every child is an individual. So we all have to think about how things are different for everyone else. So what's right for me isn't going to be right for my daughter, my son. You know, it's, everybody has to work differently, and it's about being acceptable to those changes and the reason why that we are all different. I mean, I'm looking at my desk now and I've got crystals everywhere, and the more I've got into helping and supporting James on his journey, my crystal collection is just growing, and I'm finding more about the properties of crystals and how they help support different elements of our feelings, you know, our strengths and weaknesses. We do have weaknesses, and it's okay to admit those as well, because
we can't be good at everything all of the time. It's
no,
and that's that perfectionism sort of pressure that we put on ourselves. Like, it's okay to fail. I mean, if someone's listened to this podcast now and this is the first time they've come across it, if they go back to my very first one, it is, I hope, better. But what I did at the beginning was as the best I could do at the time. So it's no good like putting pressure on yourself to be perfect. Perfect is non-existent. It's an unattainable ideal that none of us can reach. None of us can reach it. Let it go.
And we have to make mistakes to learn.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's you know, when a toddler learns to walk, how many times do they fall over, but do they ever give up? No.
And no one criticizes them for the fact that they fell over. It's okay to fall down. it is the getting up again that is it's the important bit, and it doesn't have to be instant.
Yeah, and exactly, it's not, you can fall, that's fine, and yeah, sometimes it might be a little bit more difficult to get up, but once you're up, that's another hurdle that you've achieved in that particular scenario, in that part of your journey. So you know, I think people do tend to, when they make mistakes, they overthink it, and it takes up a lot of their day. And I've been guilty of making mistakes all my life, but I try and reflect. I've learned that I need to reflect, and it's no disregard to me, it's no disregard to my family or anything like that. You know, it happens, and I need to get over it. I probably get over it a lot easier than what James does, but then he also needs to realize that it's okay to make a mistake, or it's okay to, you know, do something that hasn't quite worked out for somebody else, but you just reflect on it and do it differently next time.
And that is the only way we learn. And like, if we don't try new things, if we don't try and do things, like, of course you must you're less likely to fail if you never do something new, if you just stay in that same space. And if you're entirely happy with where you are, that's great. But you know, it's if you're not entirely happy where you are, you can't do new things unless you're ready to fail. Like, failure isn't like, I mean, I know I failed at stuff, and at the time, like, it can feel like the worst thing in the world. But as you get further away from it, as you reflect on it, as you learn from it, sometimes it's exactly what you needed at that point, and what you've learned from it helps you move forward into that sort of next stage of life, or you know, you find something that's better, more aligned, that, or you know, you fall into, or you find someone that is exactly where you need to be. And that doesn't mean that it's not painful at times, because of course it can be painful to fail.
Yeah, and everybody learns things at different rates as well, different speeds. So, you know, just because you started a journey of healing the same time as somebody else, and they look like they're doing a lot better than you are, don't see that as a negative. Just see that your journey is just taking that slightly bit longer. You know, when we're children, there's always someone that's a better reader than us, but does it stop us from reading a book? No. So, you know, just keep going. No right way or wrong way to live your journey. So you make mistakes, you learn by them, and failure shouldn't be a negative word. Failure should be a positive word. It's positive to fail at things, because you'll learn new things, you'll learn new habits.
It's just another way. It's just another way that you realize doesn't work for you. So that's one thing you can cross off the list. It's like, brilliant, that's one thing I don't need to think about. That way of doing it, not for me. And that's it with self-care. There's it's what works for you. There's 1,000,001 ways of doing things. People are going to tell you this is how you have to do it, this is the best way. The best way is the way that works for you, and you maybe need to try a few things, and you need to give them a really good try before you discount them. Because that, I think, is the other thing. It can be very easy, and I think you said this earlier, it can be very easy to try something once and be like, oh no, I didn't like that, because it might feel uncomfortable. If you've never ever talked about your feelings, sitting in a space where you talk about your feelings can feel incredibly difficult. But if it is helpful, the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Pushing yourself out of your comfort zone is definitely daunting at the beginning, but once you keep doing it and you keep succeeding at it, there's nothing that can stop you. Richard Branson is quite famous for a quote saying, if someone offers you an opportunity, say yes and work out how to do it later. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have my own struggles, and I get to the point where I have a little bit of a meltdown and I stamp my feet a little bit, especially over this last year. I haven't had a break, but neither's anybody else really. We couldn't go anywhere. Like, luckily we had really nice weather. But my business suffered because I couldn't work. I had the children at home, you know, their education suffered. I got to the point where I didn't didn't put myself under so much pressure over the fact that I cannot homeschool.
Yeah.
I can't do it. I've tried, but I didn't really know what I was doing. You know, the curriculum has changed so much since I left school. The way they do their maths is so different.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, as someone who did home educate, opted to home educate, what you experienced schooling at home is absolutely not at all like home education as an option. You and people like you essentially were being told, be a school, do these things. I can't, I mean, my children are grown. I can't imagine the pressure that must be. And I don't think that I would have complied. I think I would have struggled to comply with that, because we're in this state of stress, which, you know, that's not healthy, not helpful for anyone to be creative and productive. Stress, no. You're like, you're being expected to do things like, you know, the stuff we learn at school. I'm the same age as you. The stuff we learn at school and the way they learn stuff now is so different, worlds apart.
Oh yeah.
Your mum, they don't really want to listen to you be teacher. It's just not the same.
And the thing is as well is that we couldn't go out and explore anywhere. So we couldn't even, you know, we could go out for exercise, but we couldn't go that far away from our houses. And actually, I didn't want to go out. You know, I remember the first time I went to do a food shop, there was a police car in the car park, and I'm like questioning the fact that am I here for a valid reason to be out of my house?
Yeah.
You know, if they stop me and say, right, what is your purpose of being at this food shop here today? I'll be like, to get food.
I need food for my house.
Yeah, but it'd be like, you know, do you really need those chicken nuggets? Am I going to the store? Do I really need those chicken nuggets? Do I really need that bag of pasta? And I'm like, I don't know, you know. And you do actually question yourself. So James didn't get any of that because I did all the shopping and stuff. And so the beginning of lockdown, he was absolutely sprightly, because everything that he worried about was taken away from him and he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So he didn't worry about anything. Then as we slowly started getting back to normal, that's when the anxiety kicked in again, and actually was probably a lot worse than it was before lockdown. You know, oh well, hang on a second, now we can go out but we have to wear a mask. And
isn't it, life's changed a lot in those little ways. And if you already feel overloaded, you already feel like there's far too many decisions to make. I get decision fatigue. I'm very aware I have to have strategies in place to, you know, to keep myself, you know, mentally well. I think, and that's the thing, it's perfectly normal to have strategies to keep yourself mentally well. It's no different to having a workout that you do at the gym to keep you physically well. You follow your program. So yeah, it's, if you're already at a stage where you're overloaded, these what seem like really little things can become massive.
And
so the year that we've had has been very different. It's been for many people very stressful. We've had to think about health in ways that we haven't had to think about before. We've had to think about grief and death and our own like mortality, perhaps in a way that we haven't done before. So
with social media being so massive as well at the moment, social media isn't always a positive thing. Like James has taken himself off Facebook, and he's on Instagram because he finds Instagram a lot more user friendly, a lot more positive. You know, I think the idea of keeping up with the Joneses through Facebook, he finds a little bit too overwhelming. Like a lot of people just share everything that's positive on Facebook, and that's not a negative thing at all, but life just isn't full of rosebuds and marshmallows. It's, you know, there are some things that, you know, there is mud in the world, you know. It's, you know, there has to, but that mud has to be there to create those roses. So, you know, it's about having that really sort of healthy balance, and obviously with the one of the positive things that's come out of this this past year is the fact that people are more comfortable talking on camera. People are connecting with people all around the world that they wouldn't necessarily have connected with before. And people, I've connected with a lot of people that have helped support me, support my family through this time. And, you know, that I find that an absolute benefit. I've really struggled with the fact that I've not had much me time, but I've really tried to work around how I can change and do something different. So for me, going shopping on my own, smooching around the shops, maybe having a glass of wine with lunch and then catching the bus back, you know, that would be a recharge day for me. Now it's going for a walk along the Devon lanes, taking pictures of the bee that's taken the pollen from a flower, you know. So it's definitely changed, but my favorite habit isn't so exhilarating anymore, I have to say. Going shopping and walking around the one-way system, etc., that doesn't fill me with any joy. So my purse strings are a little bit
yeah I think that's it though. That's finding the stuff that fills you with joy, and you've been able to take the opportunity to find other things that fill you with joy, and things that I don't know how to frame it. Like, I hate shopping. Going shopping to me is just like hell. I really recognize that I have lived my best life through the lockdowns. It's been amazing for me because I have been able to connect with other people. I started the podcast. I've been able to do things that I wouldn't have been able to do before because I've had the time and the space and the energy to do it. And the whole world has had to shift to be more accessible. Because like the networking and a lot of things is in-person networking. For me, that takes up far too much energy. I don't have that energy to spend. Being able to rock up to a video call networking session is brilliant, because if I want to, I can put some makeup on and put a nice top on, and the rest of me can be like in pajamas. And if it doesn't, like, I don't have to have so many steps to get ready, which does take a toll on my energy levels. So people with chronic health, like, a lot of what other people have experienced through lockdown has been our normal lives. It's opened doors for me that weren't as accessible as then as they are now. So I think it's like you've said before, it's finding the positive. So some things not been great because, you know, my husband works in close contact, so he hasn't been able to work. The close contact work that I do, I haven't been able to do. So some things aren't great, and if I focus on those things, then it's going to be a really rubbish experience. But I got to hang out with people. My husband, I enjoy spending time with him. I got to connect with people from all over the world that I would never have been able to connect with. So it's finding the positives in the situations. I'm noticing the time we've really talked on. So I don't know.
I just wanted to like kind of leave on a note with that. Finding that positive from the day is a difficult task to start off with, but the more you practice it and the more it becomes a habit. And then, you know, so if you just try to start with one positive thing that happens every single day, write it in your little notebook that you keep by your bedside table, and then make sure you do that one thing every day. It becomes a habit. Once it's a habit, it will become easier and easier.
Thank you for coming on and being my guest today and sharing sort of your story, your philosophies, and the things that have helped you.
Thank you for letting me come on and talk about it.
I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. And thank you to people for listening to Conversations with Sarah. To find out more about me and my guest, follow at SRTT Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And I'll be back next Wednesday with a new guest. And until then, remember, fill your cup too.